Welcome to Three Questions With, a podcast by the Latino News Network, produced in collaboration with CAN TV. LNN is dedicated to best serving Hispanic Latinos with local multimedia news and information websites in the Northeast and the Midwest that include Illinois Latino News, a statewide community-focused initiative. Three Questions With is a public affairs program elevating the voices and visibility of matters most important to the Hispanic Latino community by speaking with community and industry thought leaders on the social determinants of health and democracy. I'm Hugo Balta, publisher of LNN, and your host. Black and Latino residents are 3 to 4 times more likely to be financially vulnerable than their white counterparts, according to a study by the Financial Health Network earlier this year. For many, that means they are unable to pay all of their bills on time, and about 4 in 10 reported that they experienced food insecurity because of it in the last year. Government at all levels looks to improve food access, advancing racial justice and equity for low-income, underserved communities. Still, barriers like immigration status, language, transportation prevent Latinos from tapping into resources. Adding to the dismay, pandemic-era benefit programs have lapsed. Many of the food pantry pop-ups that sprang up for a couple of months stopped when government funding ran out, but they had already become a food source community members below the poverty level relied upon. In response to the need, the Gage Park Latinx Council, a queer, femme, DACA, and Latinx-led grassroots organization based on Chicago's South Side, launched their year-round initiative, El Mercadito, a free community market that provides culturally reflective food to families in our community. GPLXC's work is already well known locally and is now getting national attention. The organization was featured in Leguizamo Does America, produced by MSNBC Films. Here to tell us more about GPLXC is the organization's executive director and founder, Antonio Santos. Antonio, welcome to the program. Let's first start with El Mercadito and how it's combating food insecurity.
Yeah, so we started El Mercadito right at the start of the pandemic. We were already doing a lot of community work and youth programming, and all of a sudden we were flooded with phone calls and text messages and people coming in saying, we're not sure, the world's shutting down, we're not going to be able to work, we don't know where we're going to get food. So it really was like an emergency response thing where we organized mutual aid to feed the families that were in our programs. But as happens, usually word of mouth spread really quickly. And so we had hundreds of families coming and seeking those services. And so we had to organize very quickly to learn how to get these resources to our community. And we're proud of the fact that till this day, we're still running in Mercadito. So it's been running for 3 years, and we've integrated it into the mission of our program because we understand that we can have great after-school programs and youth programs and this beautiful cultural center space. But if people's basic needs are not met, then the work that we are doing is less substantial. And so we need to make sure that people are eating and sustaining themselves in order to think of how we're bettering our community in the long term. So we opened El Mercadito, which is a food distribution that is culturally reflective. That was really important to us. We saw what other pantries give out, and we're like, okay, like the families that we're serving are not going to know what to do with quinoa or with, powdered milk. We wanted to get locally grown produce and culturally reflective foods. So we give out tortillas and tomates and jalapenos and whatever the people that are coming to us are asking us for. And we're able to give it out with dignity. We set up a literal mercadito, a little market where people can shop for their produce and take it home. And it doesn't feel like going into the basement of a building and getting a box and very transactional. It's lively. They know the people that are feeding them. We play music. The youth come in and they're getting free books and art supplies. And so we didn't want it to feel like it wasn't thoughtful and it had no integrity in it, because we know that pride is hurt sometimes when you have to ask for help. And so we wanted to minimize that as much as possible.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the most important things that that GPLXC does, that it's sometimes what we see in government is very transactional, right? There's, of course, a need to feed people, but they're lost in it is that detail of developing and nurturing relationships that GPLXC does, whether by the types of foods, just creating an environment with music. Tell us about the importance of your organization building those relationships so that it's not sterile and what we see too often with government focused initiatives.
Yeah, so it was very important to us because we are from the community that we serve, and we know like how would we want our grandmothers, our mothers, our aunts to be treated if they're in this situation where they need food. And because we have been building community connections for so long, we wanted to keep those things. We think about a holistic approach to serving people. And so it's about meeting all of their needs, or being able to listen to all of their needs and guide them in the direction of resources that oftentimes don't exist within our own communities. And so for us today, we're feeding close to 500 families. And many of those families have been coming all 3 years. And so not only do they depend on the food that we give them to supplement their monthly bills and overhead to be able to survive, but when you feed somebody for 3 years, weekly, you get to know them. And so many of them know us by name. We know them by name. They stop in and just have conversations about how their kids are doing in school, or what's stressing them out at home, or maybe some chisme like from the neighborhood, and they just want somebody to like be able to talk to. And so we've been able to build relationships that aren't easily replicated by mass systems or government. And I think it's given us a better insight to what our community truly needs. And it positions us in a place to best understand those things and best provide those services for our community, rather than expecting people from the outside or multi-million-dollar organizations that are run like corporations to have the vested interest of the people that we have now been feeding for 3 years, who have been a part of our programs for 5 years, who we have true community with.
Yeah, and that building of community also builds trust. Another program, another service right out of the gate that GPLXC provides the community is creating youth spaces, especially for young people, some from communities that don't have the resources as others do, to be creative, to socialize. Tell us about those programs.
We started our organization because we saw a lack of spaces for young people within our communities. I grew up in Gage Park, and oftentimes after school, the only place to hang out was the McDonald's, right? The McDonald's was the first place in our neighborhood to have Wi-Fi access. So I remember going after school and like doing homework at McDonald's with classmates when we had group projects. And we knew that there had to be better spaces, more welcoming spaces, spaces that didn't cost money to access for our young people. And so when we opened the GPLXC Cultural Center, we wanted to make it a welcoming, warm, comfortable environment for everybody in the community, but especially young people, to be able to stop in after school and either just relax. I think there's not a lot of emphasis in letting people in our communities have spaces to just be. School can be stressful. Many of the young people in our community are also helping their families financially. They're raising their siblings. And so if a teenager can come into our space and play a video game for a while, or, read a book or talk with some friends, that's really important and transformational for us. But then we also make sure that we have opportunities for them. And so we have all types of like art programming that they can sign up for and learn skills. We also have students from the University of Chicago Medical School, all Latinx students. They come in and they offer mentorship. They offer academic support. Many of our young people are first generation. They're applying to college. Their parents don't know what that process is like. And they come into our space and talk with people who come from their communities and similar families, and maybe the first in their family to go to school, and get those that guidance that really is how we're going to create like transformational institutional change within our neighborhood.
It's so important. Like you mentioned, many of the young people They're the first in their families to get a higher education. They're the first in their families for a lot of things. We talked before the program began, the attention that the GPLXC is getting locally for many years. But most recently, actor John Leguizamo, who is spearheading a project focused on Latinos at MSNBC, highlighted the work of your organization. And one of the things that really struck me was the space for young people to be able to talk about the things that they see that are challenging, but also the opportunities, and also learning about their history. And in the segment that I saw, you shared about a community leader, a queer community leader that you had no idea existed, but you had hoped that when you were younger had known about, and even a young person in that group talking about culturally in indigenous people being very accepting of queer folks. Tell me a little bit about not only creating the space that all young people, Latinos, first generation, second generation, need to be successful, but also integrating part of who they are as members of the LGBTQ community, and how important that is to know your history.
Yeah, so we know that the Latinx community is not a monolith, right? We have a multitude of experiences. And so we try to create spaces where you can bring all of your intersecting identities into the space and show up fully. Because so often when we enter spaces, we have to leave bits and parts of ourselves behind, whether that's attempting to be more professional at work. And so, trying to lessen your accent when you're in spaces, or change the way you speak. Or if you're queer, trying to pass in certain spaces for safety. So it's important for us, and when we think of our programming, it is intersectional, and it is highlighting all these multitude of identities that all of us hold within ourselves. And creating space to talk about our lived experiences is an act of revolution. Because so often we're so busy surviving, so busy working, we're so segregated within our own family units or our own neighborhoods that you don't often get an opportunity to sit across from somebody and share your life experience and realize oh wow, I also feel that way as a first generation person, or learn something new from somebody who has a completely different experience from yourself. So John Leguizamo reached out to feature our Queer Riot program, which is an LGBTQ plus internship for high school students, to learn about the history of LGBTQ plus people in this country. But the program is focused on learning from the POC lens. So much of queer history is written by white gay men about other white gay men. And so we were able to explore, what did queerness look pre-colonization? What were indigenous communities around the world, but also in Mexico, where many of the students are from, what were their ideas? And so one of the young people that was speaking was talking about the Muxes in Oaxaca, who still exist to this day and are considered a third sex, a third gender. And they play roles of honor within their families. They take care of elders. They take care of their parents. They bless babies that are born into the family. And they are able to walk around their small communities dressed in what would be thought of as traditionally women's garb, and they're not persecuted for that. And when this young person learned about that, they were like, I'm going to show this to my abuela, because I'm coming out to her. He hadn't come out yet, but he was going to. And he's like, and I want her to know that this is not something that I learned here in Chicago, right, as a first generation person. So often that's the pushback we get, that's an American thing. That's what you've learned in school. That's what the media has taught you. But queerness has always existed, and it will always exist, regardless of how people try to legislate or organize against it. And I think when you know your history, and you know that queerness has existed for thousands of years within your bloodline and your culture, it makes you better prepared to fight for your rights now, because it's it hasn't always been this way. We have not always been on the outskirts. We have not always been pushed underground. And therefore, a world can exist again where we hold places of honor and privilege within our families. And being able to share that with a young person and help them develop a self-identity younger, I think is so important, because so often many of us, not even just queer people, don't get an opportunity to start learning about ourselves until much later in life. And I think if we equip people with the tools younger on, they'll be better equipped to kind of navigate whatever's coming their way.
Empowerment, it's so important, right? When you figuratively know your history, right, where you've been in the past, you can be brave in the present as you're forging ahead to the future. So we've had a chance to speak to Antonio Santos, the executive director of the Gage Park Latinx Council, about creating youth spaces. We've talked about food insecurity and the importance of developing a relationship with the community. When we come back, we're going to get a little personal and learn more about his lived experiences and how that shaped who he is personally, but more importantly, how it shaped the work that he's done for the community.
This week on Change Agents, join me as I talk to two incredible leaders working to support our immigrant and refugee communities.
We do workforce development. We teach English as a second language. We help people become U.S. citizens, so if they can't afford an immigration lawyer, they can come to us.
See you on Thursday at 7:30 p.m. on CanTV 19. Stream Change Agents on cantv.org or download the CanTV Plus app.
We've been talking to Antonio Santos, executive director of Gage Park Latinx Council, about food insecurity youth spaces and how his organization is making a difference. Now we're going to talk a little bit about you. Like so many of us, we are influenced by our upbringing. Tell us about growing up in Gage Park and how that influenced the GPLXC.
Yeah, so I think growing up in Gage Park influenced everything about the founding of GPLXC. I was born to a teen mom who was very young when she had me, and we had a lot of struggles growing up, and she did her best to try to provide for me, and that really quickly made me at a young age realize the lack of resources in our communities. My mom always took us out of the neighborhood to go to nicer libraries, to even go to nicer schools. We had to leave our own neighborhood. When we were hanging out, we never went to our local park. We would go to a park downtown. And so that was very normalized for me. And as I got older, I really was curious about, like, why is it that I always have to leave my community to access anything? Even when I would hang out with my friends who lived a couple blocks away, we'd be like, let's meet up in Pilsen. Let's meet up, in Chinatown. And as I got older, that really didn't sit right with me, because I realized that it was a systemic injustice that people from impoverished neighborhoods and people from Black and brown neighborhoods don't have resources within their own communities and then have to travel outside of them. And not everybody can travel outside of their communities. A lot of people never leave the neighborhood in which they're born. The amount of people I meet that have never been downtown is like baffling to me. And so we knew that we had to create spaces that we envisioned and that we wished for when we were younger. And so when I created GPLXC, a lot of it was like, where would my mom would have wanted to take me and my siblings for free, to get books for free, to receive like literacy programs and story times, to receive food boxes, to be able to access computers, to be able to learn art programming or have after-school programming. And that has really influenced most of the work. I'm really lucky that my entire team, all of us live in Gage Park. All of us grew up in Gage Park. When you talk about the nonprofit world, that's almost unheard of. Usually it's people coming from outside of community into community to try to problem solve. We are one of the only organizations that I know of where 100% of the people were born and raised in the community that they're serving and still lived there. So I chose to continue to live in Gage Park as I build this work and as I create my own adult life, trying to really transform the community in ways in which I needed personally. And so I do think that we build the world that we wish we had when we were younger, and that's been like the guiding star of the work.
lived experience is so very important in creating anchor organizations like GPLXC that inspires young people to want to not go away to get all of the resources that they should be having in their neighborhood, but saying we can build it here.
Yeah.
One of the things that we talked about your organization, that while it's founded and there's a laundry list, right, that it also includes sexual orientation, right? Certainly, your background in regards to being part of the LGBTQ community, but it's not exclusive to the LGBTQ community, right? Everything that we've talked about, from food insecurity to creating spaces for young people, creative spaces, is for all people. Tell me a little bit about the importance of, in the community, members that are seeing you as more than just an organization focused on the LGBTQ community, but really what it really is for all members of the community of Gage Park.
Yeah, so the founders of GPLXC happen to be queer, but we founded the organization for our community. And so I think that it's very seldom that you see a queer organization or LGBTQ plus organization that is focused on serving everybody. And that's because we grew up in this community, and therefore I know that there are other queer people living in the neighborhood. When I was younger and I didn't really know anything about being gay or queer, because those things are not spoken about culturally in our households, I thought I was the only person in all the neighborhood that had these feelings, that thought this way. And so I think that there's a lot of invisibility there. But in serving everybody, we are also indirectly serving queer people because they are a part of the community. And so what we wanted to do was not to have those two things in silos. Again, having multitude of identities. You can be more than one thing at one time. And so by not making it like this is an exclusively LGBT space, we've been able to bring in community and have them be exposed to LGBT people who have for 5 years been supporting their families and feeding them and teaching their children. And I think that has undone a lot of the propaganda, and it's been a process of unlearning, where naturally through service and through humanity and human connection, people have been like, okay, like these things that I've heard about or was taught about LGBT people, maybe it's not so true, because these group of young people have consistently shown up for 5 years when everybody else, elected officials and people that have more access to more resources, have failed to show up. And so I think that's built an immense trust and an immense allyship, to where now mostly everybody that we serve feels comfortable in our space, regardless of their gender or sexuality. And so, we'll have LGBT teens with teens that identify as heterosexual. And it's not a space in which either of them feels uncomfortable.
It's so important to have an organization like Gage Park Latinx Council that chips away at stereotypes that are rampant in mass media, that have conditioned members like myself that are not a member of LGBTQ, shape what my perceptions are of that community. And so it's, as you said, it's integrating that narrative that normalizes the human experience, because we have a lot of things that makes us different: sexual orientation, race, gender, ethnic background. But we also have a lot of things that we have in common, a lot of needs that we have in common. And to have an anchor organization like GPLXC, as others are parachuting in, whether it's the pandemic or other, and then they go away, that anchor organization is so important. Antonio Santos, Executive Director of Gage Park Latinx Council, thank you so much for your time and for your insights.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You've been watching 3 Questions with Antonio Santos, Executive Director of Gage Park Latinx Council. When we come back, my final thoughts on food insecurity.
It's still honest, it's still thoughtful, and it's still definitely Chicago.
3, 2, 1.
Join me, Darius Hillman, for a brand new spring season of In the Arena, where we're bringing you compelling conversations with some of the most fascinating people our city has to offer, right here on CanTV 19, on cantv.org, and the new CanTV Plus app.
Latino communities experience unique challenges and are more likely to face hunger than non-Hispanic communities. In recent years, 17% of all Latinos in the United States were food insecure. In Chicago, it is estimated that 28% of Latino families with children are facing food insecurity. Those statistics underscore glaring racial prejudice and language, education, economic, and cultural barriers in the city's history that create inequalities, making Latinos and other marginalized communities impacted by food insecurity. To address this emergency, former Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot brought together city departments and community organizations to reimagine and transform the city's food system. 5 high-impact priorities identified include removing barriers to urban farming and food pantry expansion, better connecting residents with nutrition programs, leveraging city and institutional procurement to assist local growers, producers, and food businesses of color, and supporting food entrepreneurs of color. The responses hope to ensure communities that have a history of disinvestment have pathways to wealth building through food. Reducing food waste, enhancing infrastructure, and promoting more efficient production techniques are also key ways to improve food insecurity. Initiatives to grow more food locally include family, school, and community gardens, providing food and places for people to get together to not only have access to nutritious foods, fruits, and vegetables, but also education and building a culture of healthy eating. Food insecurity remains significantly above pre-pandemic levels in the Chicago area. Families shouldn't have to agonize over rationing food, depend on charitable donations, or figure out how to stretch their budgets to pay for meals to get them through the day. Let's meet the local needs and address the root causes of inequality, because access to quality food is fundamental to human existence. Secure access to food can produce wide-ranging positive impacts, including economic growth and job creation. And that does it for this edition of 3 Questions With, a collaboration by Illinois Latino News and CanTV. I invite you to look us up on our websites and chat with us via social media. Tell us what you think about the topics we talked about today, and please send me suggestions about what you think we should talk about in the future. Because at the Latino News Network, you are more than just our audience. You are our contributors. I'm Hugo Balta. Thank you all for listening.